So let's begin and welcome everybody. I start since since the war broke out. I try to begin each class with a little tefillah. I ask that the zchut of our learning should help to bring home the hostages and protect our soldiers and Am Yisrael and all of the innocents and bring a speedy end to all of our conflicts. And so with that, we'll begin. So I started to tell Catherine that the reason I decided to give the class the way I'm doing is I've been giving this class in different forms for about the past 4 years. And in the past, I started with the tour and the Beit Yosef. And anybody who's interested, the first 16 classes in English and in Hebrew. I gave the class both in English and in Hebrew, not simultaneously, but from week to week. Those are available online. They're public domain, as it were. So if you want, I can give you the link to those. The idea of doing the tour in the Beit Yosef was that the tour is the forerunner, as it were, of the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch is entirely based on the tour in the Beit Yosef, written by Yosef Karo, was his expansion on the tour. Yosef Karo's concept was he wanted to write a comprehensive, uh, almost a compendium of halachic psak up until his time on practical halacha, that is halacha that's practiced since the destruction of the temple. So, so the tour, what he decided is that the tour had already laid the groundwork, and the tour was a very popular halachic work in his time. The tour was written by Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher. His father was Rabbeinu Asher, the Rosh, and we'll mention the Rosh many times in this class. And he would bring the sort of the basis for each halacha and go into it in some detail, bringing other opinions, halachic opinions. But in nearly every case, as you might expect, the Tur paskined like his father, the Rosh, and the Beis Yosef, the name that's the name of the commentary that Yosef Karo wrote on the Tur, felt that it should be more inclusive, and he developed his own system of psak. And then later on, he essentially summarized most of his Piskei Dinim in what we know as the Shulchan Aruch. And the Shulchan Aruch is written section by section and chapter by chapter, the same as the Tur. It's written exactly in the same order as the Tur. So the reason I started off there is because the Beit Yosef will always bring the Gemara that the halacha is based on, if there's a Gemara that it's based on, which in most cases that's the case. And then he'll bring a variety of halachic opinions and come to a conclusion or lean toward a conclusion. And now, as I was explaining a little bit earlier before everybody was here, that I've been doing that, and then later on I shifted to doing the Keset HaSofer, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, and commentaries on the Keset and related literature to the Keset. And then at some point I decided I was doing, as Nava will attest, I was doing a lot of tshuvot, right, much later halachic literature. And what I realized is that most of the people who are participating or watching the videos were entirely dependent on me to read the tshuvot for the most part. Tshuva literature has its own kind of style, but ultimately all of this literature is based on the Gemara, mostly the Talmud Bavli. And I've shifted now to do the class focusing on the Gemara to see the roots and the sources that we're all dealing with. And we will, in each Sugya, we'll also be looking at various Rishonim uh, and even Achronim. But I think that hopefully one of the things that you'll get out of this is some skills in learning Gemara, and specifically that you'll have a better understanding of how, like when you learn the Mishnah Brura, how did the Mishnah Brura come up with his halachot? Or how did the Kesed Sofer come up with his set of halachot, right? They didn't come out of thin air. They're the result of, over 1,500 years of halachic discourse. And so with that, I'll begin by giving a little bit of background about the Talmud. Let's understand what the Talmud is. And I'm going to apologize if this is repetitive to you or if these are things that you know, but I want to put everything into perspective. So when we talk about the Talmud, we're talking, of course, mainly about what's known as the Mishnah and the discussions around the Mishnah that were done later that we call the Gemara. Mishnah comes from the word Mishanot, to repeat. It's really based on the pasuk of Shinantam, right? That you should repeat them. The classic translations, you should teach them diligently. It means you should repeat them. Mishnah is something that was supposed to be repeated, and the Mishnah was the distillation of the oral Torah, the Torah Shebaal Peh. So in our tradition, Moshe received the Torah at Sinai, and according to rabbinic tradition, he received the Torah Shebichtav and the Torah Shebaal Peh. So the Torah Shebichtav is literally just the Sefer Torah. It's just that. That's the written Torah. The oral Torah is everything that we know about the written Torah. That includes how to read the Torah, right? So we all know when you open up a Torah, there's no nikud, there's no ta'amim, there's no psukim. The entire way we read it is based on an oral tradition, which came to be written down. That is, the nikud and ta'amim come to be written down by around the 3rd century, around the same time that the Mishnah is being compiled and put together. So the oral Torah was everything else that we know about the Torah, so it includes reading it. And by the way, I'll just mention here, this is the reason that we don't put nikud and ta'amim in the Torah. There's a halacha that Torah shebichtav e'ata rishai la'omro ba'al peh, that the written Torah, you're not allowed to say it by heart. The Torah she'ba'al peh e'ata rishai lekotvo, you're not allowed to write down the oral Torah. And the Mishnah was the first major official break with that tradition. Until then, whatever we knew about the Torah was passed down from generation to generation, as is described in the first Mishnah in Avot. Moshe kibel Torah miSinai, u'mesara Yoshua, Yoshua's kenim, etc. Nevi'im was kenim, kenim l'anshei knesset hagdola. So all of it was passed down Baal Peh. What happened? And I won't go into a deep discussion about this. There are different opinions about exactly what was passed down. If you're interested in this further, if you want to see more, some of the traditional views on this, you have, if you read Aramaic, you can look at the Igeret Rav Shira Gaon, one of the early Gaonim, who was asked this question, and he writes a long essay, a short book that describes the Shalshelet Kabbalah, the way the Torah gets passed down. And this is more or less the way Rishonim after him understood it. You can look at the Rambam in his Hakdama to his Perush on the Mishnah. That is, now the Igeret of Shiraga, I don't use Safariya that much. I know it has a very big library. They may have the Igeret of Shiraga, and it could be that somebody has translated it. I don't know. The Rambam's Perush on the Mishnah is available on Sfariya. As Nava will know, I tend to use the website Ala Torah, which has the most recent and up-to-date version of the Rambam's Perush on the Mishnah. The Rambam there also talks about this, but the idea of it is that Chazal already talk about this idea that whenever Moshe received a new mitzvah or some other part of the Torah, that he would repeat it, and there was a certain order that he repeated it, and to whom he repeated, he would repeat it 4 times, and then ultimately, and ultimately, everybody, all of Bnei Israel, would hear it at least once from Moshe, and then they would, the whole system would be that everybody gets to hear it at least 4 times. In any event, the Rambam also talks about this idea that how was learning done traditionally? So people would have, let's say, the Torah, and they would learn psukim, and then they would discuss what was known about them in the oral Torah. So take, for example, Hilchot Pesach. So the halachot of Pesach appear in Shmot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, and Dvarim. They're scattered in different places. So, you might learn like say Parshat HaChodesh, which is the first place where it appears, and then you learn the drashot on that. And then later on, maybe you'll learn the psukim in Vayikra or the other psukim that are in Shmot and so forth. And eventually, you get, this would be the basis for what we think of as halachic midrash. So Catherine mentioned that she learned some of the Sifra, which is the halachic midrash on Sefer Vayikra. So this is reflective of the way, of that kind of learning, where you learn psukim and you darshan them. The methods of drasha that one set of the methods that are used for drasha is in fact the writer that begins the Sifra, which is the Tannaitic Rabbi Yishmael b'Shosh Esrei Midot HaTorah Nidrashet. Right, and this is also, it also appears in the Sidur at the end of Korbanot, the 13 methods of drasha. Those are according to the school of Rabbi Yishmael. There are certain aspects of that Rabbi Akiva disagreed with him on, and so forth. But nonetheless, this forms halachic drash. And then Mishnah is a different kind of learning, where Mishnah essentially does away with the psukim, as it were. In other words, we don't go pasuk by pasuk, but rather we go topic by topic. So instead of finding the halachot of Pesach in all kinds of places in the Torah, we have Masechet Pesachim, which is going to put together all or nearly all of the halachot of Pesach in one place. And that's also true then for all of the Masechtot. There is no Masechet, by the way, of Stam, right? We don't have a Masechet Stam. And there's some discussion about that we do have later Masechtot, most notably Masechet Sofrim, And we also have small Masechtot, Masechet Sefer Torah, Masechet Tefillin, Masechet Mezuzah. Everybody knows these are later compilations. There's a theory that why we don't have a separate Masechet for STaM, and the theory is that, at least the one I'm familiar with, is that STaM was a tradition that was passed on from Sofer to Sofer. It was primarily a tradition that was passed on from Sofer to Sofer, and that's how the Torah Shebaal Peh was passed on, because it had this practical aspect to it. And so it does. So a lot of the halachot that we learn and say specifically about Tzurat Ha'ot, that there are, of course, references in the Gemara to aspects of Tzurat Ha'ot, but there is no one place anywhere in the Talmud that lays out all of the halachot of the letters. That comes to be written down much later. And again, the reason presumably is because the people who were doing that passed it on visually and physically from one generation to the next. And the descriptions of the letters don't come until much later. Nonetheless, eventually, as we press through all of the sugyot, we'll see the places where the Gemara talks about Tzurat Ha'ot. In the sugya that we're going to do, we are going to talk specifically about the Yud and the Hey. They're going to come up very quickly, but other Tzurot Ha'ot will come up later. In any event, by the beginning of the 3rd century, this is already about 150 years after the destruction of the temple, many Jews were exiled. There's still a lot of Jews living in Babylonia. From the first exile, there's a significant number of Jews living in Egypt, even some by now in Europe, small communities. And there was this fear that as the Jews become more and more scattered, that the oral tradition was going to be lost. And so Rebbe and his Beit Din, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, whom we refer to just as Rebbe, that's the way he appears in the Mishnah, decided that we had to write down the oral Torah in this form of the Mishnah. And so the Mishnah is the culmination of the work that was done up until the time of Rebbe and Rebbe and his Beit Din, who sat down and finalized the order and finalized the nusach of the Mishnah. And then among Rebbe's students, we have the codification of other literature from that era. So the Mishnah was written by people we call Tannaim. Tana is just Aramaic, from the same root in the cognate root in Aramaic of lishanot, people who repeated. So they're the people who wrote the Mishnah, and or they're those are the people who will appear in the Mishnah. And among Rebbe's students were other Tanaim who wrote down other parts of the oral tradition that for various reasons Rebbe did not put into the Mishnah, but were nonetheless considered to be important and reliable sources. So those sources will include the Tosefta, right, which literally just means addendum. And the Tosefta is essentially an extension of the Mishnah. On all of the Masechtot of Shas, all right, so make sure everybody knows the language here, right? So Shas is an acronym for Shisha Starim, the 6 Starim, the 6 orders of the Mishnah. And on all of the Mishnayot of Shas, for every Masechet, we have a Masechet in the Tosefta. And the Tosefta will bring other opinions that are not in the Mishnah. Sometimes it'll bring opinions that help to elucidate the Mishnah. Sometimes it brings opinions that disagree with opinions in the Mishnah. Sometimes it brings in cases that were left out of the Mishnah altogether. So that's one important source. And then the other important sources are the Midrashei Halacha, which are the Mechilta on Sefer Shmot, the Sifra on Sefer Vayikra, and the Sifrei on Sefer Bamidbar and Dvarim. And from time to time, we will look at these Midrashim as well. So that's a quick overview of that literature. So all of that literature, which was composed by the Tannaim, so in English we'll call it Tannaitic literature. The Mishnah has a primacy because it was codified by Rebbe. It has a higher status in terms of psak halacha than these other compilations. But nonetheless, those are all very important. So then the generation that comes after Rebbe, the Chachamim of that age are called Amoraim, from the word Amira, people who they said over the oral law, and they had their discussions in the various yeshivot. So there were important yeshivot in Babylonia and Babel, and there were also important yeshivot in Eretz Yisrael, but in Eretz Yisrael, the political situation was such that Jews kept getting kicked around from place to place, and as a result, these discussions that the Amoraim had on the Mishnah were more truncated. They tend to be shorter altogether, and the Yerushalmi. So that Talmud, that combination of the Mishnah and the Gemara was called the Talmud, and the Talmud Yerushalmi, which is the Israeli Talmud, is more or less finished. It's as it were codified somewhere around the 4th century, and the Bavli, the Babylonian academies, were essentially stronger, and they continued their work, and that gets the Bavli, the Talmud Bavli, which is mainly what we're going to be focusing on, gets codified somewhere around the 5th, 6th century, and we'll talk about that as we go through. There isn't a specific date that either of these things are finalized, and especially the Bavli, for reasons that we'll get into as we learn more. Yeah, that's my very quick overview. So when we're looking now, we're going to start with this Sugya in Masechet Menachot, which is the longest single Sugya, the longest single discussion or groups of discussions that deal with halachot of STaM. The other important sugyot we'll find them in various masechtot. And in fact, I debated about whether we should start here or we should start with a shorter Sugya on Masechet Shabbat, because we're going to refer to it almost immediately. But I decided we'll stick with this, and when we finish this one, we'll go to the one in Shabbat. So now, before I continue, are there any questions that you have about what I've spoken about so far? Okay. You'll all be tested on this later, so no, I don't give tests. You'll have to do it yourself. Okay, so Masechet Menachot deals with the laws of the Menachot, right? The meal offerings that were brought in the Beit HaMikdash. Let me just quickly share another screen with you. The Mishnah, so this is the Mishnah here in Perek Gimel. This Perek Gimel is called Hakometz Rabbah in halachic literature. When you see when people refer to Hakometz Rabbah, they mean the third chapter of Mishnah. Mishnayot, of course, are divided in Mishnayot are divided as follows. There's 6 starim, right? There's 6 orders. They are subdivided into Masechtot, and then the Masechet is divided into Prakim. And then each parak is subdivided into individual Mishnayot, although the chiluk of the Mishnayot in a parak is not necessarily part of the original, and there are variations based on different kitvei yad and different prints and so forth. But in any event, this is so if you'll notice the beginning, this is now I flip back. This is Mishnah Menachot Perek Bet. It also begins with the word hakometz, hakometz et mincha. And so because our parak that we're looking at, Perek Shlishi, begins with this word, the same word, hakometz, and usually we refer to Mishnayot, to Prakim of Mishnayot by the first word or words in that Mishnah. So it became the standard just called this Hakometz Rabbah, which literally means the big kometz, but it means like the next one. So what does this have to do with Hilchot Stam? So what happens is, as we go through this parak, which we're not going to go through, it starts talking about aspects of the Korban Mincha that have to be there, and if something is missing, then the Korban is not kosher, right? It's going to be pasul. So in Mishnah Hey we have a kometz miutoma kevet rubo. The kometz is the handful of flour that the Kohen has to put in his hand to start putting together the Korban Mincha. So it says the smaller part of it holds back the larger part of it, and it goes through different things that are ma'akev. It holds back the mitzvah. So, and this is one of the aspects of Mishnaic literature and all of these literatures is, again, remember, bear in mind, all of these things were originally learned by heart. So there are different kinds of built-in mnemonics. And one of the mnemonics is that if we talk about something here like makev, that something is makev, this is makev at that. So then, toch kadei, we're going to talk about other things, that this part of it is makev the mitzvah. So in Mishnah Vav, Shnei Sirei Yom Kippurim Akvin Zeh. Shnei Kivsei, right there. So on Yom Kippurim, as we know from Parshat Achremot, you have to bring 2 Seirim. One is Korban Lashem, which is a Korban Chatat, and one is Lazazel, that gets taken out of the Beit HaMikdash and pushed off a cliff. So those 2 Seirim makvin zeh, meaning if I don't have one or the other, then the other one doesn't work either, right? I have to have both of them in order to fulfill the mitzvah. And Shnei Kifsei Atzeret, etc. There are a number of things that are makvin zeh. And so then we get to Mishnah Zayin, Shiva Kanei Menorah makvin zeh. The 7 tubes of the menorah hold each other back. So if you have a menorah that only has 6 kanim instead of 7 kanim, you might think that but I have 6, I should light 6, but no, you have to have all 7. Shiva nerotem makvineta, the 7 lamps. So it's not just the physical menorah, but also the lamps, the light, the things that you actually light. You have to have all 7. And then we get to what's interesting for us right now, Shtei Parshiyot Shebemizuzah Makvot Zu Etzu. The two parshiot of the mezuzah hold each other back. So meaning that, let's say you only have kaf big enough to write Shema and not V'hayayim Shemoah. So you might think, I should at least do that. I should at least write Shema. But no, you won't have a mitzvah if you just write Shema and put it on your doorpost. You have to have both. V'afilu chtav echad ma'akvan. Even one writing holds them back. So we'll have to discuss this in a moment. What is this ktav? And then arba parshiot shebetfilin makvot zo et zo. The four parshiot of tefillin hold each other back. V'afil ktav echad makvan. Similarly, even one ktav holds them back. And then it goes into tzitzit, which is the subject of the next parak in Masechet Menachot, is parak Cheled, where we find out that the Cheled is makevet, is whatever. The Lavan is makevet the Cheled, the Cheled is not makevet the Lavan, so forth. In any event, that's how we come to talk about mezuzah in the context of Masechet Menachot. So now with that, we're going to read. And I am going to call on people to read. But if you really don't want to read, let me know. But part of the point of doing this is to improve your skills. So I'm going to ask people to read. Let me get this bigger. Okay, so let's begin. So what I did here, this Mishnah that I just showed you in the Mishnayot, it appears in the Gemara on Daf Kafchet Amud Aleph, and the discussion about it appears one daf later. Is everybody here familiar with the pagination in a Gemara, right? What a daf is? Yeah?
Oh,
Okay, so tell us what a daf is.
a daf is two sides of the page.
Two sides of a single page, right? And so, there's nothing holy, as it were, about the pagination of a Gemara, but it just happened that the earliest prints of the Gemara were laid out in a certain way, and that pagination was adopted by virtually every other printer after that time. And the reason for that, I think it's fair to say, is until the time of printing, when you looked up a Gemara, you had a manuscript, and the manuscript didn't follow any particular pagination. But so how would you look something up? If somebody told you, let's say now, it says that there's a Mishnah in Menachot that talks about mezuzah. So how would they tell you where to find that? So they didn't have dapim, so they would say it's toward the end of the third chapter of Menachot. Once you had pagination, you had a much better way of referring people to find places in the Gemara. And so almost immediately with printing, you see in halachic literature that poskim will use dapim to tell you where their references are. So that's how we end up with this this pagination, and it's become so strong that anybody who's familiar, when Rav Steinsaltz first started publishing his Gemara, he would take a single amud, right? So amud is one side of a daf. He would take a single amud and spread it over two facing pages. And there was actually an outcry. There were people who were very upset by this because they said it's like flouting tradition. And now in the later editions, there are later editions, the current edition is a little bit different, but there are later editions of Steinsaltz where they print the standard Gemara opposite his perush, because his layout ended up not being widely accepted. In any event, okay, I'm going to pick on Nava to start reading. So start reading the Mishnah.
Okay. שתי פרשיות שבמזוזה מעכבות זו את זו, אפילו כתב אחד מעכבן. 4 פרשיות שבתפילין מעכבים זו את זו, אפילו כתב אחד מעכבן.
Okay, so now explain what you understand of that. I gave you a quick explanation. Tell me what you understand of that.
The 2 parshiyot in the mezuzah hold one another back, meaning you must have both parshiyot in order for the mezuzah to be kosher. And even one writing holds it back. Well, I read Rashi, so I don't know if I should say.
Okay, but you know what? Before you give the Perush of Rashi, what's problematic about that language? Afil ktav echad ma'akvan. I'm sorry, say that again?
It's vague. It doesn't have, it's not clear if it's a parsha or a word or a letter or what.
Yeah, it's not clear what it means. And I can tell you, because I've been through Mishnayot, we don't have this language in other contexts to say what a ktav is. It's in this specific context, it says ktav echad ma'akvan. And so I want to know what that means. What should that mean? So since you referred to Rashi, so read Rashi. Shtei parshiyot shebemezuzah.
שתי פרשיות שבמזוזה, שמע והיה עם שמוע.
Okay, so go ahead.
Should I keep going?
Yeah.
כתב אחד, אות אחת מעכבים זו את זו, בכתיב וכתבתם, כתיבה תמה ושלמה, ובתפילין כתיב הוויה, והיו לתודות.
Okay, so what does Rashi say ktav means?
A letter.
He says it means one letter, right? So now if I read that back into the Mishnah is saying not only are each of the parshiyot makvot zo, but even one letter holds them back. So what does that mean?
If you're missing one letter, the whole thing is not kosher.
Yeah. So if you're missing even one letter, you hold back the whole mitzvah of mezuzah, and that will also be true for tefillin. So that's how Rashi understands the pshat of the Mishnah. And so.
I'm not sure that I worded this the way you would have wanted me to. I'm not sure I worded this the way you would have wanted me to, but it's just in the teacher copy. But I would like you to fix it when you get it.
Okay. So now let's start the Gemara. Let's see what the Gemara has to say about this. And Catherine, can you read the Gemara? Shtei parshiyot. You're muted.
Sorry. Okay. Okay. So, Shtei parshiyot shebemezuzah me'akevot. So. Oh wait, did we do
so that we're on line 3 on the page the page. Yeah.
Just making sure.
Yes.
Okay. Afilu katav echad me'akev. Me'akevan.
Makvan.
Or makvan. Okay.
Actually, let me just interject a moment. So on the sheets that I prepared, you'll see at the bottom, I have like a little key. At the very bottom of the page, it says mafteach. It's the key. So the text that you see that's in it's actually Times New Roman. It's the Hebrew version of Times New Roman. That will be a Mishnah or a Braita. The text that's in the David font that's going to be the text of the Gemara. The text that's in, I think that's called Frankel. That's what I use for the Perushim. And this block text, I think, is called Narkisim. And I use that when I quote psukim from Tanakh. So that's something, I think it's an added value that I give to my sheets that make them a little easier to read. So what you just read is just the quote from the Mishnah. So this is the way the Gemara is laid out. There's the Mishnah, and then the Gemara starts talking about the Mishnah, but after it's finished talking about maybe the first couple of lines of the Mishnah, when it wants to talk about the next couple of lines, it's going to quote either one or two words or maybe a whole line. And so here it's quoted this whole line from the Mishnah, and now it's going to actually talk about the Gemara. So this is the Gemara. The Gemara actually begins with this word. So continue.
Shita. It's like simple, obvious. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Lo Nitzracha Ela Lekotze Shel Yud. Vehanami Pshita. So Rav Yehuda said that Rav said. So it's only needed to, like, the thorn of the yud is needed. And this is also obvious.
Right, the Hanami Pshita. So we'll go a little bit more into depth, but you're doing fine. Keep reading. Ella.
Ella ke edecha devar de Rav Yehuda Amar Rav de Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Kol ot she'ein gavil mokef la
Mukaf
la me'arba revachoteha psula.
Okay, ruchoteha. It's ruchoteha.
Okay, yeah, ruchoteha psula.
Okay, Ella lichiidach. Do you know this word, lichiidach?
I don't think so.
Okay. Anybody know what idach means? It just means other.
Okay.
Right? We only need it. Right? Rather the chiidach the Rav Yehuda. We need it for this other thing that Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav. Right? So we just had one quote of Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav. But the Gemara pushes it away, saying that's that's also pshita. It's also obvious. So no, I need it for this other ma'amar, this other thing that Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav. The Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav.
Each letter that's not surrounded by the parchment on all four sides is pasul.
Very good. Okay. So now, let's understand what the Gemara is saying here. So the Gemara starts off and says, it quotes the Mishnah, that two parshiyot b'mezuzah ma'akvot zu'etzu, v'afil k'tav echad ma'akvan. Pshita. That's obvious. So what's the Gemara's question? In other words, I put an exclamation point there, but it's a challenge to the Mishnah. What's the challenge? What does the Gemara mean when it says pshita?
This is so obvious. Why does it need to be stated here? Or what is it telling us that we don't already know?
Yeah, it's obvious. In other words, the assumption is if something is obvious, I don't need to include it in the Mishnah. We have enough to memorize as it is already. And by the way, Amoraim really did know the Mishnah all of the Mishnayot by heart. It was like a prerequisite. And they knew also many, many Braitot. Not that people don't memorize the Mishnah now, but then that was like, that was part of it. So it's a lot to remember. And, I don't need you to tell me things. I don't need you to include in the Mishnah things that are obvious. So let's hold on that for a minute. What's obvious? What is the Gemara specifically challenging?
I think the ואפילו כתב אחד מעכבן.
Okay. Why? What's obvious about that?
Oh, sorry, the other way around. The two parshiot in the, oh, no. What's obvious is that it's like stated elsewhere. The whole concept of ktiva tama. We know somewhere else.
Okay, so you read Rashi earlier, so so Rashi already essentially is anticipating this question in the Gemara because he included in the Mishnah, what's Ktav Echad according to Rashi? It's that one letter holds it back. And how does he know that? He says, I learned it from this pasuk Uchtav Tam, and there's a drashan Masechet Shabbat that says Shetehei Ktivat Tama, and Rashi adds in the word Shlema. Tama, in other words, that's Rashi's understanding of what Ktivat Tama is, and has to be whole. So if it has, and then the drasha of Tfilin he gets from Vahayu, and that's Vahavayatan Yehu, and we will eventually get to that. It's a different drasha. It's an important drasha. If you've learned Masechet Megillah, even the Mishnayot, there's a reference to it. The Gemara talks about it there. There's a reference to it because of a Mishnah in the first parak of Megillah. But for our purposes, what we're interested in is this drasha of Ktivat Tama, right? So it's a classic kind of drasha, because the Torah says Uchtav Tam, and the idea is that the tam part, which is the possessive part, is not really necessary for the understanding of the pasuk. You could have just said Uchtav, right? Right onto the mezuzot, onto the mezuzot, onto the doorpost. So the tam, as it were, is superfluous in the context of the Torah. So Chazal said it's there to darshan it, and we separate Uchtav Tam. You have to write Ktivat Tama. You have to write a whole and perfect script. So Rashi on the Mishnah said that Ktav Echad means a single letter. That was the way he understood the pshat of the Mishnah. And it's based on his understanding of Ktivat Tama. So now when the Gemara says, Afil Ktav Echad Me'akvan, Pshita, so it's true, it's referring to this part, Afil Ktav Echad Me'akvan. It's not referring to the first part, Shtei Parshiot Shebemizuzah Me'akvot Zo et Zo. Why is that not Pshita? In other words, the Gemara doesn't seem to be bothered by the fact that the first part of the Mishnah. Why is that not obvious that the two parshiot of the mezuzah hold each other back? We may not have sufficient information here. So I'm going to interject something else about Mishnah and Gemara, but especially Mishnah. So Mishnah, I gave you a quick summary, and I said, it essentially leaves off the psukim. Mishnah, when you're learning Mishnah, you're expected to know all of the Torah. In the same way that when you learn Gemara, you're expected to know all of the Mishnah. When you learn Mishnah, you're expected to know all of the Torah. And then part of that is going to be, part of the Torah Sheba'al Peh. So when the Torah says, right? It says in Parshat Shema, it says in Bayim Shemoah. So the Torah doesn't define precisely what that means. You might say that it means that I should write something from the Torah on, like directly onto the gates of my house and on the doorposts of my house. So what we know is that there's an oral tradition that says, no, that's not what you do. You write down the two places where the Torah gave us that mitzvah, which are Parshat Shema and Parshat Vayem Shema. You write those down on a piece of cloth, and then you affix that to your doorpost. So, Shtei Parshiyot Mezuzah, first of all, again, the Mishnah is assuming that you know that there's such a thing as mezuzah, and that it has this characteristic that you're writing down two parshiot on a piece of cloth. And the chidush of the Mishnah is that you need both parshiot. Like in like the example I gave when we were learning the Mishnah. What if you only have cloth that's big enough to write Parshat Shema? So you might think, well, the Torah says Uchtav Tam here and says Uchtav Tam there, so I'll at least be Mekayem the one Uchtav Tam. And I'll write Parshat Shema. So the Mishnah's chidush is, no, the two parshiot hold each other back. There is no mitzvah of mezuzah that can be less than two parshiot. So that part of the Mishnah, the Gemara is not bothered by. That is a chidush. That's not something I would have necessarily known. But afil ktav echad ma'akvan. So according to Rashi, what does ktav echad mean?
One letter.
One letter. So the Gemara says pshita. That obviously, if you leave out a letter, it's going to be pasul. It'll be ma'akev. So here, Noah, are you with us? Can you read Rashi here, pshita? And if you can, you have to unmute yourself. Okay, not getting a response. So.
Oh, it's in the chat. No, I can't read it now.
Okay.
And also didn't have the PDF of it.
Okay, that's fine. So I'm going to move to Matt. Matt, you have to unmute yourself.
I'm gonna have to, well, hello everybody. I'm gonna have to move rooms. Hold on. I'm in my office.
Okay.
Where are we reading from?
So we're going to be reading from Rashi here.
Shita, the Otechad.
Yeah. Yes.
Me'akvatem dichtiv v'kavtavtem k'tiva ta'ama.
Okay.
Right.
So how does Rashi understand the question of the Gemara pshita? What is he saying?
Otechad, so the one letter me'akvatan is connected.
No, not connected. What's ma'akev?
Ekev, like holding on to, like a
No, that's you're thinking of a cave,
Yaakov.
with a kuf. The
Oh,
akev
yeah,
is to hold back.
to hold back. Oh yeah, okay.
Okay.
So one letter holds it back.
Holds them back.
Holds them back. The tan.
Right. What's the them?
The parshiot.
The two parshiot of the mezuzah. So even one letter.
If you're saying if one letter is missing.
Right. So one letter, even if one letter is missing, it holds back both of the parshiot from being a kiyum of the mitzvah. Right. You're holding back the mitzvah. And how does Rashi know? Dichtiv.
As it is written, Uchatav Tam. That's the pasuk right there, Uchatav Tam, and you shall write them. Kativa Tama. he uses, what is it? It's a pun. It's not a pun. What is it?
It's a drasha.
It's a
This
drasha.
is what
Katav
I
tam.
read.
Katav tam is kativa tama because tama means complete, right?
Yeah, so complete, perfect. And Rashi said in the Mishnah, Ktivat tama ushlema. It's a perfect and complete ktiva. So it means that in the mitzvah of mezuzah, specifically where it says uchtav tam, it means it has to be complete. If you leave out even one letter, obviously you're going to hold back the mitzvah. So that's pshita. So like Nava said, so that's a problem. So it means maybe I don't understand the Mishnah properly, because why would the Mishnah tell me something that's completely obvious? That's pshita. So pshita is a kasha on the Mishnah. Kasha is a term, right? That's a yeshivish pronunciation. Kushya, modern pronunciation. A kushya literally means a difficulty, and it usually, not always, but it usually means there's some contradiction, or there's some kind of you know what? I'll leave it as difficulty. There's a difficulty, and so the understanding is when the Gemara says pshita, it means that can't possibly be the proper understanding of the Mishnah, because if the Mishnah just meant that if you leave out a letter that it's ma'akev, it wouldn't have had to tell me that. So the Mishnah must be here to tell me something else. So then we get to the next line in the Gemara. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, lo nitzracha, it's not needed except for kotza shel yud. It's not needed except for the thorn of the yud, as Catherine translated properly. So if I put in the positive, it means I don't need this line in the Mishnah, Fil Ktav Echad Makvan, except to tell me the thorn of the yud. So what does that mean? What does that mean? Lo nitzucha el kotza shel yud. How do I read the Mishnah now?
The Mishnah is coming to be very specific and tell you that it's not only that you need both parshiot, but you also need every letter to be formed precisely the right way.
Okay, so what this tells me now is, according to this part of the Gemara, it gives new meaning to the word ktav. What does ktav mean now?
A fully formed letter, maybe.
Yeah, you could say it means a fully formed letter. It has to have whatever is necessary to make it into a letter, and anything less than that will hold it back. So it means that the letter can appear there, but if it's not fully formed, then you also don't have the mitzvah of mezuzah. And what's not fully formed about this letter? It means it gives an example. Lo nitzucha el kotza shel yud. I only needed to tell me that the thorn of the yud is necessary. So what's the thorn of the yud? So the Gemara doesn't say, but Rashi says. So here, Nava, read kotza shel yud.
Kotza shel yud, regel yemini shel yud.
So what does Rashi say the kotza shel yud is?
It's the right leg that comes out.
It's the right leg. So in my little illustration, I made a yud that has a little chupchik going up, and it has a leg on the right side, but you'll notice it doesn't have anything going down on the left. And actually, I should have made it without the chupchik on the left altogether, because according to this, what we could say is that according to Rashi, the bare minimum of a yud is to have like the size of a pen width, and a leg going down on the right. So without that leg going down on the right, Rashi is saying, I might still call it a yud, but because it's missing this kotes, it's going to hold back the entire mezuzah from being kosher. So then the Gemara says, "Vahan." So okay, so just to review, so we said "Va'afilu k'tav echad makvan." So we thought that meant even one letter holds back the mezuzah, and then the Gemara pushes that away and says, "No, that's obvious. Obviously, if you're missing a letter, that's not going to be a kosher mezuzah." And so Amar Yehuda Amar Rav, I don't need it. I don't need the Mishnah to tell me afilu k'tav echad makvan, except to tell me kotza shel yud. It tells me that if I'm missing even this very small stroke from the smallest letter, it will also be ma'akev. It also holds back. So then the Gemara says, "V'hanami pshita." So Nava, continue. V'hanami pshita.
Nami pshita.
So what? So what's the kasha now? Hanami pshita. What does that mean? Hanami pshita.
This is also obvious.
Right. So yeah, ha is like hine, nami is gam, pshita. It's a gam pashut. This is also obvious. So why is this? Why is kotza shel yud obvious?
Because it's part of it assumes that that the letter has to be whole.
Yeah.
It has to
So
be
let's.
complete.
It has to be whole and complete. In other words, based on what we learned already. Wait a
Katav
second.
echad is ot echad, right? Therefore,
Well, so in the beginning we think that k'tav echad means ot echad, right? That's what we think it means in the beginning. I'm going to draw a little picture here. So according to Rashi, if I just have this little blip in a place that I should have had a yud, meaning it's missing its right leg. So according to in the first answer, the Gemara gives lo nitzuchel lekotza shel yud. I only need to say k'tav echad to tell me the kotza shel yud. So it means not even if it's not really missing a letter, but if it's missing part of a letter, it's also ma'akev. And then Hanami Pshita tells me that if I'm missing the coats of the yud, which according to Rashi is the right leg, then that's obviously also obviously ma'akev. Why? So Matt, read or Catherine, read Hanami Pshita in Rashi.
Yes. Hanami pshita. Hello naasita haot. So this is also obvious since it was also made without the letter.
Not exactly. Halona asit haot. The letter was not made.
Okay.
Right? In other words, if you take away the kotza shel yud, if you take away the right leg of the yud, it's not a yud anymore. You've taken away an integral part of the letter. So if you take that away, so then we're back to where we were to begin with. It's as if you don't have a letter there at all. So the Hanami Pshita, that's also obvious. I still don't need the Mishnah to tell me Afil K'tav Echad Me'akvan to tell me Kotza Shiyud. Kotza Shiyud is also obvious. For sure you don't have a letter unless you have Kotza Shiyud. Ella, so rather, the Che'idach to Rav Yehuda Amarav. Rather, I need this Mishnah to say a few ktav echad me'akvan for this other thing that Rav Yehuda Amarav said. And what was that thing? So Matt, read Amar Rav Yehuda Amarav.
The Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, Kol ot she'en gvil mukafla, all letter that is not surrounded by parchment. Ma'arba ruchotea, on all four of its sides, psula, it will be puzzle.
Okay,
So
so
it's
what is,
not about the letter, it's about the parchment. Is that what you're saying? Or is that
well,
what the Gemara is
no.
saying?
What is it saying?
Kol
What is
ot.
kol? First of all, what does it mean? Kol ot she'en gvil mukafla me'arba ruchotea. What does that mean? What do the words mean?
Every letter that is not surrounded completely by parchment. Veal is parchment, right?
Yeah, we'll just use the word parchment now.
From on all four sides.
Okay, so any letter that's not surrounded by gvil on all four sides is pasul. So what does the word ktav mean in the Mishnah? In other words, we're saying, I only need the Mishnah say, v'fil ktav echad ma'akvan, for this chidush, for this something which is actually not obvious, which is that every letter that's not surrounded on all four sides by parchment is pasul. That's what I need the Mishnah to tell me. So what does the word ktav mean now?
It means the letter and the parchment around it.
So it's the letter and the parchment around it. In other words, it's the writing. If we want to fit it a little bit more easily into the words, we might say it is the full proper way to write a letter. And one of the aspects of that, so it goes like this. We start off with the idea that if the letter is missing, it's pasul. We say, no, that's obviously if it's missing the letter, it's pasul. And then we say, well, I have the letter, but the letter is not complete. So we say that's also obvious. And so the conclusion is, what's ktav echad? If the writing is not done properly, so the writing now includes not just the letter and the full tsurata, the full form of the letter, but it also has to be written in such a way that it's completely surrounded by white space, by gvil. So that's now my understanding of the Mishnah. What we've done here is we examined this line in the Mishnah, the fil ktav echad ma'akvan, and by using this process of reasoning, we've figured out what the Mishnah is trying to tell us. And again, the Mishnah is written in this very terse language, and the Gemara is saying that this concept now of what we call hakafat gvil, being surrounded by gvil, that's essentially embedded in the word ktav in the Mishnah. That's the chidush. Nava, so read Rashi here. She'en gvil mukafla.
המדובקת באות אחרת, והיינו דקטני כתב אחד מעכבן, כלומר, הלכות משפט אות אחת מעכבו במזוזה בתפילה.
Okay, so can you tell us what that means?
שאין גביל מוקפלה, that's not surrounded by gvil, according to Rashi, means that the letter is stuck to another letter. And this is as it says in the Mishnah, Ktav Echad Ma'akvan, which is saying that the laws of one letter would be Ma'akev in a mezuzah or tefillin, meaning that every letter has to be completely surrounded by veil in order for the tefillin and mezuzah to be kosher.
Right. So now what we've done is we've added on something to our concept of Hilchot Mishpat Ot Echad that we didn't necessarily know before. Because what might I think? I might think the Torah says you have to write out the parshiot of the mezuzah on klaf. Let's say that much I know. But if I write all the letters and the letters are touching, I might say, okay, I wrote all the letters and I can read them, so I fulfilled the mitzvah. But no, what I learned from this final ma'amar of Rav Yehuda Amar Rav is that no, there's still another point that you have to take into consideration, and that is that every letter must be surrounded by white space, and Rashi explains that to mean that one letter may not touch another letter. What else could possibly take away from the hakafat gvil of a letter besides touching another letter?
Could have a hole in the parchment.
If you have a hole in the parchment, that could also be a problem of hakafat gvil. So we might store away in our minds that maybe it's significant that Rashi brings the example of a letter touching another letter, and he doesn't bring the other example of a letter that's touching the edge of the parchment, right? Which could be a hole or the bottom of the parchment or the top of the parchment or whatever. Okay, I think this is a good place to stop. So next time we will continue on, and you're all welcome to. I'm going to encourage you, if you don't have this already, if you have a chavruta to learn this, to learn it in advance and to review, I highly recommend that. And unlike the Shir Rebbe that I had in yeshiva, who did not allow us to use any outside materials for learning, but now you have Steinsaltz in English and in Hebrew. And Steinsaltz, I'll just say quickly the point of Steinsaltz, and this is something that I understood from learning Steinsaltz, but then I saw him say this in an interview back in the 90s in Haaretz. He gave an interview, and he said the purpose of his Perush, it's not so much a Perush as it is a reading of the Gemara. What he wanted to do was to make it easy for people to do this initial reading of the Gemara. So when you learn Steinsaltz, what you're seeing is that he will translate all of the words into modern Hebrew. Anything that's not immediately understood in modern Hebrew, he will translate into modern Hebrew. And the other thing he's doing is he's filling out words that when you understand the language of the Gemara, you understand that those are embedded, they're implied. He puts in all the implied words. And then occasionally he will also go out of his way to try to add some perush, some actual commentary. And generally his commentary is going to go in the line of Rashi. It's generally going to go like Rashi. On this particular sugya, what we'll see eventually, if not next week, but in the next, within the next few weeks, we will see Tosfos. And Tosfos disagreed with the way Rashi read the Gemara. We'll see that later. And but this is a good place to stop. So now, are there any questions?
First of all, I want to say hello to everybody. I'm sorry I came late. I was teaching. Is this for download? Can we print this out so
Yes.
learn it?
Yeah, I'm going to, I do a little bit of light editing at the very beginning, and then I'll send everybody a link. And you can download, it won't be for download, it'll be for viewing on YouTube. If you want, you can download it from YouTube. But I'll also have an audio version, which is for download. And that's that. So if you want to continue next week, so be in touch with me by email. And I'll tell you how we can continue. Because I'm going to use a different Zoom link next week. So if you want to continue, just let me know and we'll settle between us. In the meantime, thank you everybody for coming. Feel free to tell more people about, whoever you think might want to come. And as you see, just to say something I said earlier, so my purpose here is to help you understand the basic sources of Hilchot Stam, but I'm also here to try to teach you how to learn Gemara. So people who may not be, Sofrim or Sofrot, but maybe want to have a better grounding in Gemara, might also be interested in this. And feel free to spread the word. So, Bezrat Hashem, I'll see you all next week.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you. Bye-bye.